That's a great question. The short answer is the body has a huge and profound influence on our mind. And the reason is that we often talk about the brain and we think the brain. The brain is important, but the brain and the spinal cord, which makes up what we call the central nervous system, are extensively connected with the body, and the body is extensively connected with the brain and spinal cord. Yeah, so basically we are a big tube, or our nervous system is a big tube. So your brain obviously is the thing that's shaped like more or less like this, and then the spinal cord extends off the back, and all that is housed in skull, except for two pieces of the brain, which are the eyes, which are actually two pieces of the brain that are outside the skull.
The eyes are a part of the brain.
They are absolutely a part of the brain. They are central nervous system. So it's eyes, brain, and spinal cord.
They're all connected.
They're all connected.
So if you took that out of the body, let's say, they would all be connected.
That's
in some
right.
way.
They're contiguous, as we say. They're just one unit.
They're one piece.
That's right. And when sometimes they get challenged, people say the eyes aren't part of the brain. And well, then that means that the spinal cord is part of the brain too. And I want to be really clear. This is not semantics. There is a genetic program that ensures that early in development, during the first trimester, when we were all in our mother's bellies, the retinas, the neural retinas and eyes were deliberately pushed out of the skull. And the reason you have those eyes outside your skull is so that you can evaluate things at a great distance from you, right? Because otherwise everything would have to be in contact with you. Other animals do this mainly using smell. We are very visually driven. So a lot of our genome is devoted to vision and understanding what's going on at a distance from us. And that's afforded us a huge evolutionary advantage. A very small number of neurons that controls a specific pattern of breathing, which are called physiological sighs. So these are not just sighs where you go and exhale. These are sighs that involve doing 2 inhales and then an extended exhale.
We all do this.
You do this during sleep. Anytime carbon dioxide levels in your bloodstream get too high, in order to get more oxygen into your system. People also do this if they've been crying or sobbing. They'll do this and then they'll exhale. So what's happening with these physiological sighs and why is this powerful? So your lungs are 2 big bags of air, but they actually are made up of a ton of little sacs of air called the alveoli of the lungs. When we are exercising or when we are sleeping or anytime we're doing anything, these little sacs of air eventually start to collapse. And what happens is carbon dioxide builds up in our system and we experience that as stress. We actually feel the impulse to breathe because carbon dioxide levels get too high. There are neurons that sense carbon dioxide. And then without realizing it, you do a double inhale and then exhale. Typically the inhales are done through the nose and the exhale is done through the mouth. So it looks like, and why the second inhale? Well, if you've ever tried to blow up a balloon for a kid at a kid's party or just blown up a balloon, you sometimes blow into that empty balloon, it doesn't go anywhere. So what do? You do two, you go, and then it pops open. So these double inhales pop open the alveoli of the lungs. They don't explode them, but they pop them open, which pulls carbon dioxide out of the bloodstream, brings oxygen, and then you offload carbon dioxide. So if you watch a dog right before it takes a nap or something, it often will do these. Now what's cool about these physiological sighs is from work in our lab, and that's still ongoing, I just want to say it's still ongoing, but work in other labs as well, double inhales followed by an extended exhale are the fastest way that I'm aware of to bring the mind and the body into a more relaxed state.
Really?
Yeah.
The fastest way. So if I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, just do a 3 or 2?
2 inhales through the nose, and then exhale slow through the mouth. 1 to 3 of those repeated will bring your level of autonomic arousal down basically to baseline. But I think for anyone that experiences anxiety from time to time, which is everybody, knowing that you can consciously take control over these neurons that control the ratio of carbon dioxide and oxygen in your lungs, etc. Even if you don't remember any of that, it's just 2 inhales through the nose. What you're trying to do is maximally inflate those little sacs in your lungs and then exhale long through the mouth because you're blowing off carbon dioxide.
I heard you do does it matter the cadence? Because you did a long deep breath and then a shorter?
Not so much.
That's just your style.
Yeah, you're just trying to fill those as big as you can. So the advice that we hear of take a deep breath or just exhale is sort of right, but it doesn't capture this neural circuit. The most direct and fastest connection between the brain and body for controlling your state of mind is what's called the phrenic nerve, P-H-R-E-N-I-C. The phrenic nerve connects these neurons that I'm referring to in these two brain centers that control breathing with the diaphragm.
Huh.
A lot of people get excited about the vagus nerve, and I'm not out to punish the vagus nerve or the veganistas, but the truth is the vagus nerve is a very slow system for calming the brain and body. It's called the rest and digest pathway. People are engaging their vagus all the time when they eat a big meal. When the stomach is distended, it sends a signal to the brain that, oh, I have enough food, it's time to rest and digest. But eating, first of all, if you're only using food as a way to control your stress,
That's not a good habit.
it's not a good habit.
and you'll be depressed one
That's
day.
right. People have learned long ago, thousands of years ago, that the best way to suppress a cortisol response is with carbohydrates because it blunts cortisol. But this is why people eat carbohydrate-rich foods when they're stressed.
And when cortisol is spiked, what happens?
So every morning when you wake up, there's a cortisol spike. That's a good cortisol
It's a stress spike, right? It's like
It's a good one. It's the one that wakes you up out of sleep, and you want that early in the day.
So you're not just like groggy all day, right?
That's right.
Okay, I'm
Cortisol has important positive health promoting functions. There's a signature of depression and anxiety, however, that the psychiatrists know about, which is a 9 p.m. cortisol spike. For people who are depressed, there's a second spike of cortisol late in the day. And that's problematic and is associated with a lot of mental health issues.
And cortisol is a stress hormone, is that right?
Cortisol is a stress hormone. So you have your adrenal glands, which are right above your kidneys and your lower back, and there are two parts to it. They release adrenaline, which is also called epinephrine. And adrenaline is what makes you feel agitated. If you're calm, you're walking along, you look at your phone and there's a troubling text message, you immediately have focus, energy, and alertness.
Is the brain connected to those then, and it sends a signal to each other?
That's right.
Really?
That's right.
And then it
Exactly.
affects the body.
That's right.
And then the
Two-way
body
highway.
feels it.
That's right. So adrenaline is liberated into the body very fast, in less than a second, 500 milliseconds.
You see
half a
something, you're reacting to it, and
That's
it's
right.
just boom.
That's right. And it recruits a set of neurons that live right in the core of your body. They then send a signal out to your body, and all of a sudden you feel like you want to move. And
Let's go.
the stress is just, it's going to dilate your pupils, cue your alertness, and make you agitated and want to move.
The body's pretty fascinating.
It's really fascinating. And you don't have to do that breathing. You could if you like, but you don't have to do that breathing to recruit the immune response.
What else could you do?
A cold shower or an ice bath is another way to induce stress.
Which is what he does too.
Exactly. And so I think that, when you look at states of stress, cold water is one way to do it. The breathing that they do, that sort of Wim Hof breathing, is also classically called tumo breathing. It's kind of the opposite of the physiological sigh that I described, the double inhale exhale, because it's not designed to reduce stress. It's actually designed to increase your level of alertness. And it's interesting because a lot of people find great relief from stress by doing this tumo type Wim Hof intense breathing once a day. Now, the reason I suggest physiological sighs is they can be done in real time. You can get into the elevator and do a physiological sigh. You could also do tumo type breathing.
In any moment you can do a...
Right, exactly. Whereas the more intense forms of breathing are more of a practice that you do.
Might take 10, 20 minutes or yeah.
What they tend to do, and what cold showers and ice baths and things like that do, is they raise the ceiling on your stress threshold. And what I mean by that is, throughout the day and throughout the year, we're confronted with different things. Right now, we're confronted with a lot of things. 2020 is the year of being confronted with stress of various kinds. The mind plays an important role in interpreting whether or not it's overwhelming or tolerable. So intense breathing like tumo breathing, or ice baths, or cold showers, or intense exercise like high intensity interval training type stuff, teaches the mind to be comfortable in these higher stress states, where, in other words, it teaches people to be comfortable when they have a lot of adrenaline in their body. This is basically stress inoculation. But stress inoculation is not about not getting stressed. It's actually about divorcing the mind-body relationship a bit, so that you're calm in the mind when your body is very amplified.
Stress.
Yeah, so if you've ever done tumo type breathing, or you've done a cold shower, the goal is to get the adrenaline release.
And then calm your mind.
And then calm your mind. One of the most dangerous ideas in wellness and in popular psychology is that your body hears every thought you have. What a terrible thing to put on people. You know,
Wow.
what a challenging thing. I don't think people should try and suppress their negative thoughts. I think there is great value, however, to introducing positive thought schemes. Now, the reason is not because I think it's just because I think so, but because there's actually a neurochemical basis for controlling stress and actually making stress more tolerable and extending one's ability to be in bouts of effort. And that relates to the dopamine pathway. So the molecule dopamine is a reward. It's released in the brain when you win a game, you close a deal, you
Someone
meet
likes
the
your
love of your
photo.
life,
Someone likes
your photo, the great love of your life, you complete something. But most of our dopamine release is not from achieving goals. It's actually released when we are en route to our goals, when we're in pursuit of our goals, and we think we're on the right path.
Yeah.
Now, the cool thing about dopamine is that it's very subjectively controlled. We can all learn to secrete dopamine in our brain in response to things that are in a purely subjective way.
Our interpretation.
Our interpretation. But it has to be attached to reality. So, one should never confuse
What is real?
Right. So if you're thinking about the effort you're expending. So let's say somebody right now is financially back on their heels and they're setting up a new business, for instance, and it's hard. If they can take a few moments or minutes each day to reflect on the fact that the effort process is allowing them to climb out of their hole potentially, that it's giving them an opportunity, that it's somehow they are on the right path, or if they're not in movement along that path, or at least oriented on the right path, they're not lying in bed all day.
They're taking a step
They're
forward.
taking a step. If they can reward that process internally, two things happen. First of all, the brain circuits that are associated with building subjective rewards and dopamine get stronger, so you get better at that process. And second, and most importantly, dopamine has an amazing ability to buffer adrenaline and buffer epinephrine. And what I mean by that is there was a study that was published in the journal Cell, excellent journal, Cell Press Journal, a couple years ago, showing that with repeated bouts of effort, we use and we release more and more epinephrine. It's kind of adrenaline, but in the brain.
With more effort, we release this.
Every time you put in effort. So every time you make, for this, let's keep it, if I were to keep it in the business context, every time you write that email, every time you, let's say it's a person who's a craftsman or a craftswoman, every time you're working in the shop and doing that, every bit of effort, you're taking a little bit of money out of this epinephrine account. You're spending epinephrine. At some point, those levels of epinephrine get high enough that you feel like quitting. It feels exhausting. And this was done in a beautiful study, actually, where they control the visual environments and they have the subjects exert effort, and they can control the visual environment. So sometimes the effort of taking steps and moving forward, this is actually kind of pushing forward and kind of swimming motion, would give them the sensation that they were actually making progress. And other times it was an exercise in futility where they would just keep the visual world stationary and they would expend effort and they didn't think they were going anywhere.
My gosh.
Epinephrine's climbing, and eventually they quit. Now dopamine is able to push back on that epinephrine and give anyone the feeling that you could continue, and maybe even the feeling that you want to continue. And you've seen this actually, football is a good example. Two teams play, say the Super Bowl. Both teams are max effort the entire time.
Yeah.
Max effort. The team that wins suddenly, in a moment, has the energy to jump all over the place, party for days. They can talk, they
were
have
exhausted
energy.
right before
That's right.
then.
Well, that wasn't glycogen or stored energy of any kind, except it was neural energy. And what happened was, effort is this adrenaline. Eventually, people quit. They just quit. The dopamine is able to suppress that. And so then you're expending effort, but you're doing it from a place of feeling like you have energy for it.
So we need dopamine to keep the effort going. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That's right.
How do we get more dopamine?
You practice subjectively releasing dopamine in your mind.
Like how?
Okay, so that's a great question. First of all, there are ways you can get more dopamine release through thoughts or through drugs or through supplements. I want to be really clear. There is a drug, there are two drugs actually, that will cause massive release of dopamine. They're called cocaine and methamphetamine. The problem
That's what
is,
gets us addicted because it feels so good.
the problem is cocaine and methamphetamine stimulate so much dopamine release that the drug becomes the only source. It becomes the goal
of
and
joy.
the path. It becomes the path and the destination. And you look at people's lives when they do a lot of cocaine and methamphetamine, and that baseline on their life goes down very,
Because there's
very
no
fast.
reason to work hard at anything else because you feel good.
That's right.
And that's the greatest feeling you'll have. So why do anything else when you can have that feeling?
That's right. You look at people in special operations, you look at the process, like the whole evaluation process of who gets in and who doesn't. It's really about putting people into stress and seeing who can not just make it through that stress, but buffer that stress. Reward the process through teamwork, reward the process of stress through some internal dialogue that has everything to do with not being back on your heels, not being flat-footed, but center of mass forward. And I should also be clear, I'm not talking about everybody being super aggro and always like,
Work, yeah.
In fact, if you're spending too much epinephrine, if you're too much of an adrenaline junkie, you will burn out eventually. Unless you can find ways to recover yourself or to buffer that with dopamine. And the recovery process is especially important. There's a second reward system. So you've got the dopamine system, and I guess to really put a box around it, the subjective reward needs to be done at the hardest portion of a process. The tough conversation with a significant other, it's like when it's really tough and that's when you want to start telling yourself, this is the good part because I'm not speaking, or this is the good part because
I'm not reacting.
Right, I'm not reacting, or this is the good part because I'm probably not doing it correctly, but I'm on the right path, right? They're upset, they're not feeling your empathy, this kind of thing, or you're not really understanding what's going on, you're getting frustrated. But if you tell yourself, this is the neural pathway getting ground in there, like really dialed in, so that the next time I'm gonna breeze right past this.
Yeah.
That's really how the process works. Because remember, no one comes along and drips dopamine in your ear, even if you get $1 billion, or you win a Nobel Prize, or you win the presidency. It's all internal. These neurochemicals are all internal, and while some of them are designed to be released in response to things very reflexively, like food, sex, sleep, all these things will trigger these neurochemicals. We have this big forebrain which allows us to place subjective context on things.
How do you do it then? How do you bring dopamine in your brain subjectively through daily conversation with yourself?
So there's a process I'm going through right now where I'm trying to write a book, and it's hard. And I was told that the harder it is, the better I'm probably doing it. And I was like, great. And my editor's ready to kill me, and because I'm slow, and I know, and I'm a very slow person. I drive people crazy. I'm like glacially slow because science is slow, and I like to get things right.
You want to rush it. Yeah.
I like to get things right, but I'm very proud of the fact that everything we've published, I can stand behind. It was the best we could do with the tools at the time, and I just know that when I look back on a writing career or a scientific career, I want to be able to say, every journal we put it in was rock solid, everything was rock solid, we had fun doing it, the relationship, so I go slow.
Yeah.
But as a consequence, what I'm finding is there are a lot of interferences these days. I think social media is great. I teach neuroscience on social media because I think it's important to do public education.
But it's a distraction too.
But it's incredible. And it's incredible how much time and energy it can take. So what I've started doing now is I turn off my phone and I lock it in a safe. And I experience extreme anxiety.
Right?
It's so weird.
Why is that? Is it because it gives you so much dopamine that when you're not having it?
Well, this is scary because I actually think, brief anecdote, on the weekend I was driving, there's a kid that I mentor, and I picked up my phone and I was texting while I was driving. And he said to me, this was really embarrassing for me, he said, I wish you wouldn't text while you drive. And I put it down and I realized, this is crazy. I know that my life and his life is far more important, and the lives of the people around me are far more important than any text message, which means I wasn't doing it rationally. It's just pure reflex at this point. So I don't think I pick up the phone because I don't even know what I'm looking for there anymore. It's just become reflexive.
Wow.
So for me lately, the longer I can keep that phone in a safe and write on a grant or this book, what I tell myself is the agitation is good. At least I'm not doing that. And then I find that as I start to write and I get into the process, I start feeling good about it, and I'll pause and say, okay, I have control. I have ultimate control over my behavior. I can put that thing away. There might be a nuclear war out there, and I'm just doing this anyway. I have control over my thoughts, my feelings, and behavior. So I tell myself that, and then I find I have immense energy, and all I want to do is write. And I kind of tunnel into the process.
Wow.
And I think that sometimes people need to write these things out for themselves so it's really concrete. I think some people are so unskilled at subjective rewards that writing it out is really powerful.
So what would you write out for yourself as a subjective reward for this experience?
As long as I'm writing, I'm on the right path. As long as I'm not writing, I'm looking at my phone, I'm not on the right path. Because for me, the 2 or 3 things that are most important for my career are writing grants, working on this book manuscript, and writing scientific manuscripts. I mean, there are other things as well.
And anything else that you're not doing is holding you back from doing that.
That's right.
So you need to be focused, center mass forward on doing those things.
That's right. So I don't do any jumping around, power poses, things like that. I will use tools to kind of ramp up my dopamine. There are certain songs that are really embedded in my emotional thing that go back to, when I was a, wild, skateboarding punk rock teenager that will get me fired up. And I think there's real utility. That's pure dopamine. That's just a dopamine.
Moments, but it's not sustainable. You have to subjectively keep yourself motivated, I guess. Right?
That's right. But my goal is to be as, deliberate and non-reflexive as possible in life. That's my goal from when I wake up in the morning until I go to sleep.
How do we get to that place?
Little by little and by rewarding each thing. If you get up and I'll use the make the bed example, make the bed, you're not back on your heels, you make a cup of coffee, you sit down, you script out something in a journal, you exercise, maybe you call a relative that you think might need to hear from you or that you'd like to talk to. You do something in a deliberate way, just being deliberate and learning to push away the things that are trying to make you reflexive is so important.
Reflexive, same thing as reactive, or what's reflective?
Yeah, so there are 2 modes of brain operations. So now this is getting a little nitty gritty, but one is deliberate, where we're thinking duration, path, and outcome. What should I do? How long should I do it, and what's the outcome?
Deliberate.
Yeah.
Intentional.
And it feels like work. This is what people need to understand. That deliberate thought, deliberate action, writing the book, doing the workout you don't want to do, whatever it is, having the conversation, it's supposed to feel hard.
It's hard.
It's supposed to feel hard. But you should subjectively reward it so that you get better at doing that. So it's supposed to feel hard because it's associated with this release of these neurochemicals that create this agitation. The mental strain you feel when you're learning something is the trigger for neuroplasticity, for your brain to change.
Say that again, the mental strain you feel while doing something is the what?
Is the trigger for neuroplasticity.
Which neuroplasticity allows you to expand your mind to do more things.
That's right. So neuroplasticity is a process of taking something where there's duration, path, and outcome, where I'm working hard, I'm thinking hard, maybe it's a hard conversation, maybe it's a business plan, maybe it's a scientific career. And the goal of neuroplasticity is to make things reflexive so you don't have to think about them. So the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is is a gratitude. No matter what pops in my head, I reorient to being grateful that I'm waking up. I mean, I've had a number of close calls in life. I've lost people like everybody. I'm 45, so, seen a lot of babies born, seen a lot of people die. That's just the way it goes. But I express some gratitude for just waking up.
Yes.
And that puts me in forward motion. And then I can do things like make my bed, reward that I'm not doing something else, and start getting into things. And I tend to reward relationships in a big way. My dog's 10 years old. I raised him since he was a puppy. He's a bulldog. He's probably getting to the end. I try and really just focus on the sheer pleasure of having a bulldog. They're such characters, and him in particular. Relationships of all kinds. Like if I spend time with people, I just try and think about mentors, people that got me where I am. I do that all the time. Be conscious of it, but I think a deliberate practice of relishing or enjoying what we have is so powerful, and not just going through the motions.
If we're not enjoying it and we're just waiting for the end result, we're going to be unhappy.
Well, absolutely, and there's something called dopamine reward prediction error, where people work, where they expect something to be great, and as you do that, you actually raise the level of dopamine that's required to make it feel good when you get there. This is why people, achieve great things and kill themselves. And I don't want to give the impression that people have to follow these protocols because I'm talking about them. We were all given these. People will sometimes ask me, they'll say, is there an app or a product around this? And I just say, look, Mother Nature has the patent for this, Whatever people's beliefs, this stuff was built into us for whatever reason. And we can use these different neurochemical pathways to organize our life in a way that really serves us and the people around us best. And the gratitude practice can be 1 second long. It can be 10 minutes if you want. People do love and kindness meditation. I've never done that. I've always had a hard time being in meditation for a long period of time. I'm not good at mental visualization. So I tend to gear more towards behaviors.
Wait, you're a neuroscientist. You're not good at mental visualization.
well, I try, but I think we all differ in our ability to hold on to a mental imagery, and mine's kind of fleeting. So I tend to write things out. But yeah, gratitude practice. I try and get sun in my eyes. I mean, exercise. I'm fortunate that I love exercise and training. I think that got into me young. For people that's harder to do, then you just build these things up through subjective reward. If you stimulate the areas of the brain that release dopamine and acetylcholine, you can rapidly induce plasticity, like one trial learning, like Spanish today.
Right.
Like fluent in Spanish today, which is kind of scary. This is actually the basis of companies that are thinking about inserting wires into the brain and stimulating.
I could be fluent in Spanish today?
In theory, if you stimulate enough acetylcholine and dopamine release while experiencing enough Spanish, you probably have to speak that Spanish. You probably have to read it.
Wow. You could remember it and connect it.
Yeah, it's possible.
It's like Matrix.
It's possible.
It's like I know Kung Fu.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet, but it's possible. It's been done in other forms of learning in other studies.
Really?
Yeah. Well,
what's it called?
Well, if you release that, you'd have to actually have an electrode down in your head. I don't know that you want to drill a hole in your skull.
Put something in your head.
You'd have to drill through the skull.
Put enough dopamine in your.
You would remember the dopamine comes from the neurons that are in there, so you'd be stimulating the dopamine neurons, the acetylcholine neurons, and you'd be probably reading a Spanish script. There are, I will say there are.
Shut up.
Yeah, well, there are programs happening right now to accelerate language learning through implantable electrodes.
No way. It's already happening?
It's happening.
Someone's done it before?
It's happening now.
They're testing it now.
I don't think they're at 1 day for fluency, but they are definitely at massively accelerated language learning.
Really?
Yeah. I have close friends that do this sort of thing for a living.
You know someone who's done this?
Who run the laboratories who do this kind of thing. Absolutely.
So what do? They put something in your head?
Well, the goal, so we know that dopamine and acetylcholine, from experimental already published results, if those are released, then in massive amounts, whatever you pair that release with, whatever sensory experience, massively rewires the brain according to that experience. So Merzenich has these beautiful studies where he showed that if you play a certain auditory tones and you stimulate these brain areas, the auditory cortex, the area of the brain that listens and hears and understands sounds, massively rewires according to what was played in that moment. But because these neurochemicals are like gates, they open the gate to plasticity. You normally engage them by focus, agitation, stress and strain, self-reward, etc. Or going to, and having a conversation in Spanish where you're like, wow, I'm doing it.
I'm fluent.
I'm doing it. That's going to keep you. I get it, right? But you can imagine there are groups on this planet that are very interested in rapidly accelerated language learning that would be willing to put many millions or billions of dollars, probably not billions, toward programs to get massively accelerated language learning by putting either implantable chips in the brain that will stimulate these brain areas, including memory areas, or stimulating acetylcholine or dopamine.
So people have already done this where they put they cut open their head and put a chip in their brain.
These are neurosurgery patients who are already undergoing surgery for other reasons and have agreed to be part of the study.
This?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and there are animal studies doing this all the time.
Shut up.
Absolutely.
And are there any results of this?
Well, they're not. The groups that are doing these sorts of things are not going to reveal the results just yet. So you can imagine that these are related to government military type contracts. It makes sense. Most of those drugs are illegal, but there's a whole world of drugs in sports that are geared around the mental side and focus and the ability to get into sleep. I mean, you can bet, given now the understanding that sleep is so fundamentally important for performance, people are hacking sleep like crazy. Chili blankets, magnesium, theanine, certain things that I think do work. People are wearing Whoops and Oura rings, and it's all about sleep now, right? It's all about sleep because it's so powerful. And
sleep is the ultimate drug.
And people are now developing drugs that will allow people to fall asleep and sleep better, function better on less sleep, optimize the amount of slow wave sleep time. Anyway, it's a whole world. I'm fascinated by it because it's the extreme of the things that we're talking about. But for the typical person, behaviors are the way to go.
Behaviors.
And nutrition is not an area of my expertise, but incidentally,
The body is connected to the mind.
The body's connected to the mind.
And if the body doesn't have good gut health and good nutrients, then it's going to be affecting the way you think and the way you feel and the way you act eventually.
Absolutely.
It's going to be harder and harder if you don't have energy.
Right.
And food and nutrition gives you proper energy.
That's right.
Or it takes the energy away from you.
That's right.
It depletes you from energy. So the older we get, it's harder to expand our neuroplasticity, but that's why we should be learning new challenging things every year is what I'm hearing you say, to help us.
Yeah, and whether or not it extends the lifespan, I don't know, but I do know this. So the dopamine pathway is intimately tied to the reproductive hormone pathway. So testosterone and dopamine have a very close relationship. So much so that they're released, and their triggering of their release is from very neighboring areas in the brain. Because if you think about it, it's the pursuit molecule, right? Like testosterone's main effect is to make stress and effort feel good. That's what it does. It suppresses that kind of grinding response, like it's painful, and increases recovery. In women, which are more estrogen dominant than testosterone dominant, and both men and women both have testosterone and estrogen, of course, estrogen is sort of similar to testosterone in that it's coupled to dopamine. A lot of people think the opposite of testosterone is estrogen. It's not. It's a molecule called prolactin. Prolactin is what's secreted after orgasm. It's what's secreted after a big win, and there's that crash. It's designed to keep organisms in the place they are so that there's pair bonding, there's recovery, and shift them into that serotonin regimes. So the reason I mention this is that being in pursuit of goals and trying to trigger neuroplasticity isn't just about changing your brain. It's closely linked to the reproductive hormones, testosterone in men and estrogen in women, meaning it's linked to the will to live. The will to pursue, and it's not just about sex. I know as soon as we talk about testosterone and estrogen, people think about mating behavior. It's that, but there's a lot more. It's the will to live. So when dopamine is reduced, the will to live is reduced. When serotonin is too high and dopamine is too low, people feel like they have everything they need. Think chronic pot smokers. No beef against the pot smokers, but they don't tend to be the most ambitious people. Sometimes they are, but they tend to make people pretty placid. Think, any high levels of antidepressants that make you feel like you have enough of everything you need, they make people there's a passivity there. So that's why it's important to keep these things in the right range. So the will to live is tied to the dopamine system and to the reproductive system.
So what are we doing? What are we doing when we don't have a goal in our life? What happens to us?
We are essentially on idle. It doesn't mean that we don't have the will to live. It means that we are idling. And the brain and body, because they are so intimately related with one another and affect one another, they see when we're in pursuit of a goal. And that sends every organ in the body the message to keep going. That, the will to live is getting at a kind of a deeper abstract concept, but it's a real thing. And so people that are low in estrogen, and typically in women, or in men, people that are low in testosterone, or low in dopamine. So it's ultimately dopamine, which is motivation and drive and pursuit. You don't want it too high, but you definitely don't want it too low.
And we need, in order to increase our dopamine, we do some of these tools.
Right, you want to be in pursuit of something. You want friction, but you also want to be able to reward the effort process, reward that friction process. Now keep in mind, children, which have the ultimate will to live, in positive environments, children are wonderful because they're all about the will to explore and live and learn. That it's just their default is to explore, live, and learn.
Yeah.
And children are flooded with dopamine. You show them a baby something new, and it's like, because the Mother Nature has wired them to use that process to incorporate new ideas and new learnings.
That's how they can learn.
That's how they learn.
The more dopamine they have, they can learn, they connect ideas, and they can grow.
They play. I mean, you tell kids a story, a ridiculous story, and they'll go with you on that. As we become set in our ways, it's kind of interesting. The brain, over time, the space between the neurons tends to fill in with this stuff called extracellular matrix. It's like pouring concrete between the neurons. It makes it much harder for them to rearrange and move around. But a lot of beautiful studies, experimental studies, have shown that that extracellular matrix, if it can be reduced, the neurons can move around and form new connections. And the way to do that is by triggering some strong pursuit goal. The more important the goal is, the faster the plasticity is going to happen.
What about fears? Do you have a lot of fears? And how much does fear play into the body and mind connection?
Fear is huge in the body-mind connection because it can shut us down. I mean, fear can really take us to the point of, from a place of feeling really great to just, it can like crump us all at once. And I mean, the things that, well, I have several fears. One is, I have this weird history in science where my undergraduate advisor, my graduate advisor, and my postdoc advisor are all dead. They all died young. So it was suicide, cancer. It was really rough because I was close with all of them. And so I have one major fear, which is dying without getting the information that I believe should be out into the world. Because I'm struck by this all the time, when people die, there's no download from their brain. There's no fossil record of their thoughts. Unless they write, they speak, they put things out into the world. For some people it's art, for other people it's their family, whatever it is. But one fear is that I'll get hit by a bus or something or have a heart attack before I'm able to express, sort of put out my expression. That's one. And then the other is, these days I have a lot of irons in the fire doing public education, running my lab. My lab's actually 2 labs. I guess a big fear of mine is that, in trying to take on so many things that the quality will drop. And so as a consequence, I've had to really put boxes around my life so that I can really dig in. And I'm blessed to have amazing people in my lab. I mean, my lab operations manager, I would die without him. My graduate students and postdocs, they're phenomenal. And so I'm blessed to have great people around me, but I would say that's one of the big fears is that, that I can't do it all.
Yeah.
And of course I can't, but I have not tried to learn Spanish fluently.
Do you want to or no?
I do. Actually, a few years ago, I promised on social media I was going to learn Spanish as proof of principle for neuroplasticity, and that I would deliver some of the tutorials in Spanish because there's huge parts of the world that I think are curious about neuroscience that don't have access to them. And I abandoned mission temporarily.
I'll tell you what, man, I've been saying this for 20 years, I want to learn Spanish. And for whatever reason, I have a Spanish girlfriend now from Mexico, which gives me more of a motivation, which I know you talk about needing some greater motivation.
It'll accelerate the process.
Yeah, if you have like a reason why, as opposed to just, I want to do this because you're going to quit probably, unless there's a bigger reason, a bigger reward at the end. And I've been saying this since, high school. I took Spanish in high school, college. I've traveled all over Latin America, Spain, everything. I'm a passionate salsa dancer. For 15 years, been dancing extreme amounts of
guys
salsa
like you
dancing.
have bumped me out a number of times because when salsa picks up, there's salsa dancing. I'm like over the door, like periphery of the room.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was another thing that I was committed to learning because it was so challenging to learn that I was like, I need to go all in. I need to create like reward loops for myself, all this stuff, because it was so embarrassing and humiliating to get started in something in a completely uncomfortable setting.
But now you're very skilled at it.
Now I can go anywhere in the world, any salsa club, and find the best dancer and dance with them in a moment without speaking to them and feel 100% confident.
That's admirable.
It's the greatest feeling. And I want that in every other area of my life. I want it in Spanish because I want this message to reach 100 million people a week. And I know the Latin community could use this message as well.
Your incentive was the same, like information transfer.